So it's not inflation or deflation. It's a case of misrepresentation. Bitcoin is demonstrating everything is in a hyperinflationary collapse against Bitcoin. So those are the real things that are happening for real.
Bitcoin feeling the blues again today. The cryptocurrency is now down nearly 15% since hitting a record just before Coinbase started trading last week. We asked then, has Bitcoin hit its peak? We'll listen to what Guggenheim CIO Scott Minerd had to say this morning about where prices are going.
The superior man, when resting in safety, does not forget that danger may come. When in a state of security, he does not forget the possibility of ruin. When all is orderly, he does not forget that disorder may come.
Also, only a tiny percentage of my viewers are actually subscribed. If you enjoy the video, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind. Enjoy the video.
Max, apparently disorder will come, as Confucius warned. Well, this is an entertaining title. I like it, and it's from Egon von Greyerz. He says that when bubbles burst, we will discover how very few superior men there actually are, as defined by Confucius, who said, the superior man, when resting in safety, does not forget that danger may come. When in a state of security, he does not forget the possibility of ruin. When all is orderly, he does not forget that disorder may come. Thus, his person is not endangered, and his states and all their clans are preserved. So Egon von Greyerz, who runs goldswitzerland.com, he's a big gold bug. He believes that disorder is coming and no man is prepared. Many states are not prepared for the disintegration of the everything bubbles.
Yeah. No, I've been studying these gold bugs, for a while. And as gold continues to lacklusterly go nowhere, they're reaching deeper and deeper into the canon of quotes to come up with something to say. Here we are quoting Confucius to add some content into the blogosphere while gold continues to do nothing. Well, that's an interesting idea, and the disorder may come someday, and we may see gold go up someday. That's true. It hasn't happened in the last year or so, but it might happen.
He just have one or two sentences in this piece about gold, saying that he believes gold is a good safe haven for this, but in particular, he's talking about inflation and possibly hyperinflation coming. In the second half, we'll be speaking to Rick Ackerman, who does not at all believe in hyperinflation or actually mass inflation. He sees deflation coming, and therefore that will be the chaos. That will be the disorder to come. So we're showing two sides of this argument from the outside the Bitcoin world. What the other analysts looking at the data of the debt, what they see. So Egon von Greyerz sees that all the debt causing inflation. Rick Ackerman sees all of that debt causing deflation. In terms of what Egon von Greyerz is presenting, he's saying, for example, that just take the U.S. When Trump was elected in November of 2016, U.S. debt was at $20 trillion. Based on history, I forecast that it would reach $28 trillion in January 2021, and it did, and $40 trillion in 2025. At the same, most market observers found this forecast preposterous, but sadly, they hadn't studied history, which told us what would happen. Of course, it has hit 28 trillion, and now he's predicting that, in fact, that forecast of 40 trillion by 2025 is an underestimate, that it'll be even higher.
I don't seem to understand how the economy can take on so much debt and at the same time prices for stuff are skyrocketing, right? So in the example of houses, houses are up like 20% a year. And that's not considered inflation. And the government, in response, is printing lots of money or expanding credit to encumber the country with more debt. So it's not inflation or deflation. It's a case of misrepresentation, essentially, in that you've got those who have the most capital also own the media outlets. So they present an illusion, a hologram, a story, propaganda on the mainstream media outlets. And they use terms like inflation and deflation. They use them incorrectly. They should be talking about feudalism and neo-feudalism. They should be talking about hyperinflation as Bitcoin is demonstrating everything is in a hyperinflationary collapse against Bitcoin. So those are the real things that are happening for real. But you don't hear that.
No, the narrative that they present is that they celebrate and applaud it, right? So when your house price is going up 50,000 a year, the median price went up last year in the United States, 50,000. Well, they celebrate like that's income for you. You have more equity, you have more value. You're rich, you're getting rich. They don't describe that as something that we should be against, that i.e. the next generation gets locked out of the housing market. I remember very early in Keiser Report, actually, back in like 2010, we covered, Warren Buffett actually said that at that time. It was after the collapse of the housing market. And he said, I don't know why anybody celebrates house prices rising like that anyway. It's just an intergenerational wealth transfer. It's not an asset like any, ordinary person should consider. It's it's a huge cost. It's a burden.
Well, can someone explain to me why Jay Powell over at the Fed and Janet Yellen at Treasury will look at house price up 20%, annualizing appreciation 20%. They'll look at that and they'll show a chart of that and they'll discuss that and they'll call that deflation. Can you explain to me why they call that deflation? It's like holding up, a duck and saying, this is a turtle, right? Or it's like pointing to the sky and saying, the sky is orange. I mean, it's a patently false statement. It's a frickin' lie. It's a lie. It is a lie. So where's the New York Times? Where's the Washington Post? Where's CNN? Where's the mainstream media? These are two important people in American life, and they lie. The ugly lie from Jay Powell and Janet Yellen. They lie. And yet no one's covering this. But people are suffering. So I wish that there wasn't the amount of suffering that there is, but there's nothing I can do about it because there's a tolerance for lying, sadly.
Well, if your net worth depends on that lie, then you end up, believing it. You're willing to suspend disbelief that anything else could happen. Now, in terms of that U.S. government debt and what Egon von Greyerz sees as his future in terms of where the debt is going, he also gives some really interesting data on the compounding, how much debt is compounding in America on the government level. So he said, based on current situation of the U.S. economy and the forecasted deficits and credit expansion, $40 trillion in 2025 is too low, and we are now looking at U.S. debt of $50 trillion. Remember that when Reagan took over in 1981, U.S. debt was under $1 trillion. So 44 years later, the debt is forecast at $50 trillion in 2025. That is an astounding compound annual growth rate of 28% of U.S. debt between 1981 and 2025. And this figure does not include potential defaults in credit or derivatives markets, which could increase the $50 trillion exponentially. Total U.S. debt of $84 trillion can never be repaid, and nor can it be serviced at non-manipulated market rates.
But let me explain the ugly truth of what's happening in America. So you've got these tens of trillions of dollars worth of debt and heading to $50 trillion worth of debt, which is just another way to say U.S. government treasury bond.
Yeah.
Which are currently, the 30 years are roughly 2%. Now, how do the coupon or the interest on those 30-year paid? They're paid from taxes collected from taxpayers. And taxpayers pay those taxes to the federal government, who in turn pay off the bondholders, who own those bonds, the richest 0.1%. It's a wealth transfer mechanism. So it's not inflation, it's not deflation, it's neo-feudalism. It's the US government in cahoots, Janet Yellen, Jay Powell, and whoever the president is at this time, I'm not keeping track, but they essentially coordinate and conspire to issue trillions of dollars worth of debt, and the interest has to be paid by the U.S. taxpayer. Most of your taxes now go to the top 0.1% to pay their bond interest by design. That's not inflation. That's not deflation. That's not democracy. That's not a republic. That's neo-feudalism. And the people, obviously, who can't afford healthcare, can't afford housing, can't afford education, who are living in the mud, living in the dirt in America, opiate addicts, strung out on dope all day, they're not having a good time. But nobody covers it, because if they did, as you say, they would lose their jobs.
Right. Well, again, like a lot of people like the inflation and the house prices that are the result of these huge amounts of debt. But also the way Egon von Greyerz describes that is he's like, okay, the derivatives are going to collapse as well, just as Brooksley Born predicted back in 2000 that it would cause a financial crisis, as it did in 2008, and it will do in 2021 or 22 or 23 soon once it all collapses. But that sounds deflationary to me. So just as Rick Ackerman in the second half will argue, but he's saying that that will cause a currency crisis, and all hyperinflations are a currency crisis. So he thinks that it will cause the currency grid to collapse and therefore cause the hyperinflationary thing. So, watch the episode, make your own decision on it. But here's another example of people celebrating. Australia, we've covered that. We've had Steve Keen on many times over the years, who was always talking about how the bubble is unsustainable there. And yet Australian house prices forecast to see their sharpest rise since the 1980s. At least in the introductory paragraph, they do present the downside of this, as we have done here on the show. In grim news for Aussies trying to get their foot on the ladder of the property market, house prices are tipped to soar by a massive 17% this year across our capital cities, marking the fastest pace of growth since the late 1980s. So they're establishing that the younger generation, as Warren Buffett said, it's a wealth transfer from the young generation to the older. And they do point out that it's all to do with government programs. The government is intervening in Australia on behalf of a certain sector of people, i.e. the voters that vote the most, the ones that will be happy with the price gains and therefore continue voting for those policies, whereby, those struggling to get on the housing ladder, hopefully for the politician, they're working 3 or 4 jobs to save enough money to get on the housing ladder so they don't have time to go vote. So, these are the sort of, this is why these schemes happen, is enough, if you get enough of the voters to support your scheme, then obviously you can continue to win re-election.
These terms are ludicrous. So it's like you have a shop on Main Street somewhere in America. The government agents show up with baseball bats and they smash everything in the shop. They steal all the inventory and they set fire to your store. Is your response going to be, gosh, I'm really suffering from deflation? No, that's not what's happening. It's a coordinated heist by the plutocrats against the many. And the result is feudalism, neo-feudalism, and the whole lockdown is just preparation for mass incarceration, I'm afraid, but that's the life in the big city.
Well, certainly the wealth gap did explode in the past year, and that is the setup of this debt. Whether it's causing inflation or deflation or hyperinflation, the fact is there is a massive feudal-like situation where the likes of Jeff Bezos, the multi-billionaires became closer to trillionaire status in the past year. And you can't deny that. That's in the facts and the data, and that's because all the money printing does boost asset prices. That's what the Fed wants. That's what, as Danny Blanchflower, who used to be at the Bank of England, he said that's what they wanted as well by quantitative easing. So that's what they've got. But whether or not it causes, disorder will come.